I realized that I'd gotten very fat. Now, I'd always been fat, but I realized that I'd gotten very fat.
That's a bad word these days. You can't
Yeah, well, that's
not
why I
just
can
saying
only
that
say it about
yourself.
myself. I can say it about myself.
Rabbi Rael Blumenthal is the rabbi of Boca Raton Synagogue West in sunny South Florida. He's a rabbi on a very public journey of change. In this episode of the Maggid Method, Rabbi Blumenthal candidly shares how a few years back he became dissatisfied with his body weight and eating habits.
I ran. It was 1.67 miles, and it took me about half an hour. And I couldn't move for about a week after that. I was in so much pain.
And how he set out to shed the pounds in a very methodical and public type of way.
I went through about 8 months where every month I had to buy a new suit.
With the goal of inspiring his congregation to make positive changes in their lives too.
I was able to encapsulate this process as a process of tshuva, which has been incredibly helpful in terms of my own framing, but also incredibly helpful as a mashal for so many other things whenever I'm speaking to other people in the community.
If there's one word that defines Rabbi Blumenthal's Drashos, it's relevance.
Nobody comes to Shul for an irrelevant Drasha. Nobody's interested in hearing a rabbi talking about something that has nothing to do with them.
In this interview, we discuss a fascinating technique Rabbi Blumenthal uses to guarantee that his congregation not only listens to his drashos, but that they actually retain the message long after his drasha is over.
The mark of a good drasha is that when a guy goes home and his wife says, "What did the rabbi speak about today?" That's a one-sentence answer.
We also cover how Rabbi Blumenthal needed to shift his speaking style to reach the current generation of Shul goers.
I think people are not interested in hearing a rabbi stand up and saying you. People want to hear the rabbi stand up and saying I or we.
We also talk about how you can use the challenge of speaking in an era of distraction and shrinking attention spans to your advantage.
If things are interesting, people have no problem paying attention for extended periods of time. And if things are boring, people tune out instantaneously, which is good.
What I love about Rabbi Blumenthal is how seriously he takes his role as rabbi, yet at the same time, how he doesn't take himself too seriously, and how humbled he is at the opportunity to be in his position.
There's a whole world of Sfarim, of Torah, that has been cooking up solutions to life's biggest problems for the last 4,500 years. And I have the incredible schus of having access to that. And I have a tzibur of people that don't have the same access, but have the same right to that knowledge. It's their Torah as much as it's mine. My job is to take that and give it to them.
I learned so much from my conversation with Rabbi Rael Blumenthal, and I'm sure you will too. So without further ado, here's my interview with Rabbi Rael Blumenthal.
But I understand that you're a runner. That much I got.
Recently. No, that's recently as of the last 5 years or so.
5 years. Okay. That's a while. I started when I was about 38. I started running, and I still run, but I ran for about 10 years. And what got you into it? I'm curious.
So I was never a runner. I was not just not a runner. I was not athletic in any way, shape, manner, or form. I liked, cycling. I found I enjoyed that, but some point in time, about probably 5 summers ago, more or less, I realized that I'd gotten very fat. Now, I'd always been fat, but I realized that I'd gotten very fat.
That's a bad word these days. You can't.
Yeah, well, that's why I can only say it about myself. I can say it about myself. When I say this, people get very offended. They're like, "How could you say it?" No, it's me. I'm talking me. No judgment on any other human beings in the universe. But me. I was a fat guy. I was very fat. And I got to the point that I realized that it wasn't even just the weight and the lack of comfort and mobility, and I realized that and probably reflect on this in terms of Rabbanas, so much of Yiddishkeit is about food. There's such a huge component of what we do that is food oriented. There's no such thing as like Jews getting together without food being present. Shabbos, Yontif, Kiddush, Malava Malkas, Tishes, weddings, Shalom Zachas, Shmorgs, everything's about food. And that's a wonderful thing that Jews get together and eat together. I think it's something essential to the development and collegiate aspect of a community, is that people eat together. That's not something that exists in the wide Western world, that people get together to eat. Even like, socially, in a relaxed kind of setting. But I realized that at a certain point that I dreaded Kiddush. I dreaded it because I knew that I was going to feel gross about myself afterwards. I was going to overeat, and that I was going to feel yuck, and I was like, why? Why am I doing this to myself? Like, why am I eating so much? And so much of it was just habitual. Like that, by the time you get home for Shabbos from a Kiddush, you feel gross, and then you sit down to eat, and then you feel even more gross. And I didn't like that feeling. I didn't like it. And that coupled with like weight gain and feeling like my clothes just weren't fitting me anymore. So I decided that summer that it was time to fix this. So I started losing weight. And there's a whole story to the how and the why.
I'm curious if you'll indulge us. We'll fill out the whole picture as the hour progresses. But yeah, go ahead.
So I'll say the how and the why is particularly interesting. I joke about the fact that I'm the only Jew to lose weight eating almost exclusively at Dunkin' Donuts, and I mean that for real, absolutely, legitimately for real. There was a Dunkin' Donuts, a kosher Dunkin' Donuts that opened up in Boca a couple months before that and closed shortly after. So I was there for a perfect slot where there was a kosher Dunkin' in Boca Raton. I decided to do this scientifically, like I try to understand and learn anything else in my life, to do this methodically. I was my own guinea pig. I went online and I looked up base metabolic rate. There's calculators you can Google base metabolic rate. I put in my age and my weight and my height, and then how much. Then it calculates. It's an algorithm that calculates basically how many calories your body burns in order for you to be alive. With the basic math being, if you eat more than that, you're going to gain. If you eat less than that, you're going to lose. So I figured that in order for me to lose weight somewhat, not, aggressively, but fairly aggressively, I would need to be eating about 1,800 calories a day, which is a decent amount. That's not starvation by any stretch of the imagination. Just I happened to be very fat at the time, so any amount less than what I was eating would have done that. But I'd never counted calories, and I didn't want to become one of those people. That wasn't like my jam. I didn't want to become one of those like neurotic calorie counting, how much I'm, weighing things on scales. Like I knew that would be far too much of an impedance. It would be friction to the whole process. So I'd read online that protein is good for you in the morning. So I went online and I bought a whole bunch of protein shakes that were about 200 calories each. And for about a month that summer, I woke up in the morning, I went to Minyan, I took my kids to camp, and then I drove to Dunkin' Donuts. I had a protein shake on the way. Then I got to Dunkin' Donuts, and with 1,600 calories to play with, I ordered 1,600 calories of stuff from the menu. So,
what's that, about 2 or 3 donuts?
So I tried everything. I tried the hash browns and the sandwich things and the donuts and the croissant. I tried everything. Tried everything. Some days I was so hungry that I inhaled all of it in the car on the way home. And then that was it. That was the rest of the no more food for the rest of the day. And then there were some days that I managed to pace myself throughout the day. But after about a month, I'd lost about 35 pounds.
Wow.
And that felt good. It felt good to see myself losing weight. I also felt like I was going to die because eating Dunkin' Donuts every day will do that to you. So I realized that I need to probably switch the food that I'm eating, but the calories that I was eating, that I didn't know how much I needed to eat in order to be full because I was so used to overeating for so many years. And I decided, okay, beseda, let me figure out how much I need to. How full is that feeling? I didn't know what that feeling was. I had no idea. So I figured it out. And then a couple months later, I got a random email from Meir Kaniel from Rabbis Can Run. That basically the email was, would you like to go to Israel and run a half marathon in Yerushalayim? And it had been probably 3 years since I'd last been to Eretz Israel, and I was like, you know what? let me do this. This is crazy. And I looked at my wife and I was like, hey, I'm gonna run a half marathon. And she looked at me, she's like, the weight loss thing is great, but you're out of your mind. Like you've never run, you've hated running your whole life. Like I was like, I'm gonna sign up and then I'm gonna be mechuyev in doing it. So let's go. I still have stored on my phone like the screenshot of my first run. I think I ran. It was 1.67 miles, and it took me about half an hour. And I couldn't move for about a week after that. I was in so much pain. But I had signed up, so that was it. So I laced up some sneakers again, and I tried again. And then amazingly, I found my community to be incredibly supportive, and a lot of people were very excited to see me doing this. And it took a good 3 months of like real pain and agony to start enjoying the process a little bit. But because I had signed up, I couldn't quit. So it took a few months, and then little by little, I started enjoying it. I got to Eretz Yisrael, ran a half marathon, and I realized that process was something that I enjoyed, so I kept it up.
Amazing.
That's the long and the short of it.
Yeah, I saw a couple pictures when I did a search for you online. So I saw a couple pictures, and I saw what I'm looking at now, and I saw, I guess, previously clean shaven and you know, a little larger than you are now, and I couldn't tell I couldn't know it was the same person. I mean that's how radical the change is.
Yeah, I went through about 8 months where every month I had to buy a new suit. That's it took a while. It took a while. I was buying very cheap suits because I was not planning on wearing them long term. I bought a suit a month, and then 3-4 weeks later, it didn't pay for me to get it taken in because it wouldn't have helped. So I got cheap suits, and then Baruch Hashem, after about 2 years or so losing weight, I donated all of those suits because they were pretty much brand new. So that was a good feeling. And people said to me, they're like, why are you giving them away? Maybe you gain weight. I was like, but I don't plan on it. So that's the although I tell people all the time that the avoda of losing weight is not something that finishes ever. Because give me a month and I could eat myself into oblivion. Those yetzer haras are there. They are baked in. They are part and parcel of my basic nature. That's my teva. I love eating. It's not something that I love any less. In fact, arguably, I love it more. But I now have the skill to be able to control myself. I'm not always matzliach in that. Everybody has good days and bad days when it comes to any yetzer hara, but it's a yetzer hara. And recognizing it as a yetzer hara meant that I was able to encapsulate this process as a process of tshuva, which has been incredibly helpful in terms of my own framing, but also incredibly helpful as a mashal for so many other things. Whenever I'm speaking to other people in the community, there was, I suppose, wrapping around to Drashos to a certain extent. There were, you know, there's been a good few Drashos that have drawn on this narrative as a mashal, because it's real, but it's also something that has it's got its fingers in a lot of different pies of everybody's challenges, because people have challenges, and to a large extent, I found my kehillah in general to be incredibly receptive of me being vulnerable about this kind of stuff. And you talk about it from the comedy angle, like I joked about this stuff a lot, like, and it was healthy for me, but it was also healthy for other people to see that, like, yeah, this is a real struggle that their rabbi is going through, and very publicly. You know, and there's not a whole bunch of things that are more public about a rabbi's challenges than being incredibly overweight and working on fixing that. And there's only one of two ways of doing it. You could either pretend like none of that's happening, or you can own it. And I found that owning it was helpful. And Baruch Hashem, there were a lot of people in the community, still ad hayom hazeh, that have told me that they've been inspired by it a year, 2, 5 years later, and have chosen to do different things in their life. I get knocks on the door and phone calls from time to time from people in my community, but also far and wide, saying, you know, Rabbi, I know that you did this, and I'm wondering how. Like, could you walk me through it? Could you coach me a little bit? And that's been, aside from being something that I'm happy to be able to share and to give, has also been chizuk for me to be able to refresh and revisit those thoughts and emotions. And that's been helpful, for the whole
Yeah.
rabbinic package.
Yeah, amazing. I read some of your sermons online, which we'll get into in a moment, where you talked about a recovery run, which
Yeah.
obviously, yeah, you're drawing on your experiences slimming down. So let me ask you. I noticed. So your website is where you publish your sermons, raelblumenthal.org. And blew me away. I read three of them this morning. I like to do a chazaka, so I do a sampling, but the first one was so good that I wanted to go to the previous one, and then instead of jumping around, I needed to see the previous one. So they really reeled me in. They're phenomenal. And I saw a theme, and I wanted to ask you about it, which is it seemed, at least in the last 3 weeks, they open with a question where something that you're struggling with from almost like an Emunah perspective. Why we know Hashem has a plan, but why does it have to be this way? Why does it have to be so horrible? Why does it have to be so grueling? If this is the Geula, why isn't it the Gullus ebbing away and the Geula just taking more of a front forward position? They seem to be working, side by side with each other. And it struck me as I guess maybe the way that I would describe it is as you're addressing the questions that the Kehillah has, but may not know how to articulate, kind of like the Eino Yodea Lishol, right? That Apatachlo, you open up the question for him by describing what's on his mind, what he should be thinking to ask. Is that would you describe that as maybe an accurate portrayal of?
So yes, to a certain extent, although sometimes it's not me originating the question. A lot of the time, these things come about organically in the conversations that I have with Chaver and Shul. In general, I'll just differentiate. There's so that I write up every week, that gets published on my website, but also in the Boca Synagogue Weekly every week. That's not the same as my drasha. I mean, I also give a drasha in addition to that. So usually every week there's a written piece and a spoken piece to a certain extent. And the spoken piece, I used to be a lot more diligent in writing out word for word. Now, because I'm spending time writing that piece, the drasha is not always written out word for word, but is always outlined. But both of them come from more or less the same angle, which is what's going on in my mind, in the minds of the people around me. What are the conversations that are happening? I'll say it like this. I don't find it helpful to talk about things that aren't relevant to people's lives, because nobody comes to Shul for an irrelevant drasha. Nobody's interested in hearing a rabbi talking about something that has nothing to do with them. And nobody's interested in reading a timely piece that is not something connected to where they're at and how they're living. And if on the rare occasion I would be discussing something that's not relevant to the audience, it's because I want it to be relevant to them. Meaning something that they don't think about yet in this way, but I want them to think about it in this way because I think that that's important. So it's either offering perspective on what people are already thinking, articulating it, as you said, and then trying to resolve it in some way or another, but also an opportunity to a certain extent to bring awareness to often latent thoughts that, like, this was a fleeting concern, a consideration that most times people will roll through. Will say, like, whatever, like, that's a bothersome thing, but I'm never going to get an answer to that. Like, there's no good perspective that I'm going to have on that. So I see a lot of my role as drawing attention to that thing that was like, whatever, to be able to say, oh, no, this is something meaningful that we should talk about, consider, think about, meditate on. So that's another kind of angle that I get to. But for me, if it's not relevant to what's going on in my life and their life, then there's really no reason to bring it up.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like the you lead with the relevance. And so how do you go about, I mean, in a perfect world, you find the links to the parsha, to the relevancy. But it doesn't always happen. Sometimes you need to talk about something, or something's on everybody's mind, and there is no obvious link. So what do you do in those situations?
It's a great question. I don't know if there's a method, so much as um, to a certain extent, I firmly believe two opposing things. Opposing side number one is that if there's something relevant to talk about, it doesn't have to be connected to the parasha, which I do firmly believe. If there's something important to talk about, it doesn't have to be linked in the parasha. And I'm strongly of the opinion that forcing that link to the parasha is contrived. I'm not looking to force anything into the parasha. But on the other side, I also know that if I'm learning Chumash properly, so that there's a hashgacha pratis, that if there's something relevant to talk about, then there's something in the parasha for me to learn that from. And if I don't find that in my own learning, I won't force it, but I'll also know that I didn't learn it properly. Because I expect that if I'm going to be learning Chumash, I'm going to be learning the parasha and reading Mefarshim and looking at what's going on in the Torah organically by learning it, but with that question in my mind: how am I talking about? How am I resolving this? Then I should find something there. And if I don't, then I'm not learning it properly. And if I'm not matzliach in that, so I'll beat myself up, but I'm not going to punish my community by give them a contrived cliche Dvar Torah that is connected because it needs to be connected.
Yeah.
No, that's my own personal, standards that I'm going to hold myself to. But where that comes from, so I think it comes from learning. I don't really look for a drasha as I'm looking for a drasha. I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to learn. Drasha is 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, maybe. But if there isn't a lot more for me to say about it, then it's not worth speaking those 15 minutes. That's a snapshot. That's something that contains the pieces of before and after, that if somebody's going to come up to me and follow up afterwards and say, actually what I was thinking, where can I find more in that? If I don't have more to share with him, that's the sum total of what I've managed to connect the parasha to this particular idea. It's not enough. And then it's not emes. It's not authentic. It's contrived. And I don't want to be teaching in that kind of way. So if I don't find it, it's not meaning that it's not there for me, then I'll connect it to something that I know is real.
Got it. So I didn't have the luxury of seeing you speak live, but what are the primary differences between what's printed online and your drashos?
What's printed online is to a certain extent conversational, but it's formal conversational. I'm not talking, when I'm writing, I'm not talking from an abstract perspective. I'm talking as me. But when I'm speaking from the pulpit, I really do try to engage in a conversation with the tzibur, which means that there's jokes that are thrown in, that there's turns of phrases and a quote here and a quote there that don't reflect well on a page, but come across as part of a conversation. What I find the most important part in speaking versus writing is that when it comes to writing, people can refer back to an earlier piece in the writing. So if you miss the point, you can go back. So I can say things that are sometimes more subtle and allow them to develop. When it comes to speaking, it needs to be a lot clearer. Meaning there should be no mystery by the end of the drasha as to what exactly did the rabbi say. I always note that the mark of a good drasha is that when a guy goes home and his wife says, "What did the rabbi speak about today?" That's a one-sentence answer. What did the rabbi spoke about? what did he say? Okay, so he said this, and he said that, and he brought that story. But what did he speak about? What was that main message that the rabbi said? So there can be only one. That's rule number one by me, is that there can be only one thing that the rabbi spoke about. What did he say? He said a bunch of stuff, but he only spoke about one thing, and that was the main message that the rabbi wanted to convey. And in my earlier years in Rabbanus, I felt almost like well, obviously I'm saying that thing, and then I realized maybe I'm not being so clear. Like when I overheard people saying what I was talking about, it wasn't always as obvious to them as it was to me. So sometimes when I'm not 100% sure that I've said what I'm speaking about, I'll say, I want to tell you what I'm speaking about, and I say it. But Pem Mole, like this is the thing that I want you to go home with, to know this detail. That when you sit down at your Shabbos table, I want you to talk about this with your children. These are the things that I want you to bring up over lunch. Come back and talk to me about this thing that we're talking about. Because without that capturing, so Shabbos morning, people are in and out and half asleep and half awake, and they'll get the joke and they'll get the story, and that was funny. And then we're like, well, what was it that the rabbi was actually trying to get like nail on the head? And it's like, I don't know. What was that thing? That was like, wee. So putting that as a front and center, like this is what the rabbi spoke about, that is essential for a speech, as opposed to in writing where you can be a little more elusive, make the writing more interesting by developing it as a beginning, middle, and end, kind of a mystery. There's a question, and then there's an example, and then there's an answer. Making it too mysterious in a drasha means you might have lost half the audience. So a kid screams outside, and you're like, oh, I missed that point totally. What did he say? So that's probably the major difference. And then stylistically, there's obviously differences here and there.
Tell me about, you seem very adamant that you stick to one point for the drasha. There's one single message. I'm curious, what's the intention behind that?
If I'm trying to educate something, I need to know what that thing is that I'm educating. I want somebody to know something, to think about something. And if there's two somethings, then one of them is more important than the other. And if one of them is more important than the other, well, then I should speak about that thing. Meaning a drasha is 15 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe. And if I'm talking about something, so what's the thing that I want people to know? And if it's important, then I'm going to use my time so that they get that point. And if it's not important, then I shouldn't speak about it. And aside from the fact that like it's muddling up and mixing what the message is or isn't, but if I want people to know something, then that's the thing that I want them to be aware of. And there's a lot of tangential things that I like people to pick up and enjoy and learn along the way. I tell a lot of stories, and I introduce personalities as part of the stories, but it's very clear that, I'll tell a story, I don't know, last week was Reb Zusha's Yartzes. I'll tell the story about Reb Zusha. And I'll introduce Reb Zusha as a character, but he's a character within the story. Reb Zusha's life story is not the point of the drasha. It's color, and it's something that you'll walk away with, but it's not going to mix up what the message of the drasha is. That's going to color the meaning of what we're saying, where it comes from. Knowing where something comes from is always a good idea. So, okay, this is a message that has significance because of who said it and why they said it and what life they lived and what were they trying to say through this particular message. Good. And that might be inspiring for the crowd all by themselves. People might look at that and be like, it was enough to come to hear that little story. And it might be for some people that's what they walk away with. That's fine. But what did the rabbi speak about? I didn't speak about Reb Zusha's life story, unless that's the topic of the drasha. Whatever I spoke about, that's something extraneous. That's something different. I want people to walk out with something, with something that they can say, I was kind of this. This was the thing that I've acquired in this process. And it also means that I can reflect back on previous drashas as, you'll remember 2 weeks ago we spoke about, and people will know what I'm talking about, as opposed to 2 weeks ago I mentioned in passing this really essential point that I want to reflect back on. Maybe people knew it, maybe they didn't. So without that singular message, it's hard to know if I'm achieving anything.
Sure. How do you decide what goes into the drasha and what goes into the printed drasha?
Exactly. It's hard. It's hard. To a certain extent, the things that I'm thinking about, the drasha, the article for the weekly is written up by Wednesday. So whatever I'm thinking about Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday becomes the article, and whatever I'm thinking about Thursday, Friday becomes the drasha.
So first come, first serve in your brain.
To a certain extent. There are certain things that that I'll be thinking about that. I'll say it like this: the article gets a wider readership because it goes online. People. So if there's things that I think I want to reflect for Klal Yisrael that are not necessarily nogea specifically to my kehillah, but are nogea to Klal Yisrael, so they'll get put into the article. Things that I think are specific to my kehillah, and that I know that are specific to my kehillah, I'll write up news for the Drasha. And sometimes those things switch, and sometimes they change, and sometimes there's something that I really want to address here and something that I really want to address there. And then I'll think about what the best medium is for that. But the time crunch is a blessing and a curse. Because people talk about in the greater world the challenges of content creation. Rabbanim are the originals when it comes to content creation on a tight deadline. We have to think about meaningful things to say and to think about and to share with people and to write about and to speak about. So the juices always have to be running, and what I've learned is the overthinking of what I'm going to say is at least in the first draft is never healthy. There have been times that I've sat down looking at Svarim with a question in my mind, trying to find a mahalach to understand something, and it takes 3, 4, 5 hours of looking back and forth and sefer, and in between the phone calls and the classes and the running in, the running out, and picking up the kids, and running an errand and just stewing on something. Then I'll sit down and I'll start writing, and then it comes. The hesitation to start putting pen to paper or fingers on a keyboard before having something concrete, I found is something of a yitzhara as well. To avoid that, just to start writing and see where it goes. There have been times that I had a great point that I really wanted to talk about in an article, that I'll start writing the article and it comes out totally different. I'd be like, that's a kedai thing to do by itself.
Yeah.
So is there a method? I don't know.
So tell me about your background as a speaker. Where did you take public speaking in college, and you were in the smicha program, homiletics? Did you have influences, inspirations, role models? How much did you learn on the job?
So I learned public speaking formally in 5th and 6th grade. That's when I started, because I grew up in South Africa, and in South Africa, public speaking is an extramural and an intramural. There are public speaking competitions, and because I wasn't particularly athletic, so I enjoyed the more academic pursuits. So debate and public speaking were things that I got involved in. And I was trained from a very young age in public speaking, from index cards and standing upright and holding it in front of you without a podium, because that's how the competitions work. And writing a speech, editing a speech, learning how to say it, learning how to make eye contact and when to look down and when to look up. So those kinds of things were things that I picked up for many, many years in high school in South Africa. And then by the time I got to yeshiva and got to college, I realized that these were skills that a lot of people didn't have because I'd been formally trained to a certain extent, and most people hadn't. So when people needed somebody to speak about stuff, so I was the selection that made people comfortable, and I was happy to do it. And I enjoyed it. It was something that I enjoyed. And then, as I started learning more and reading more and giving more divrei Torah, so that became something that I try to get better at. Obviously, Rabbanim and Rebbeim and my Shul rabbis in South Africa were original influences to all of these things. And then in yeshiva, seeing how different people present and how different people speak. I also spent a number of years working for NCSY, where I would give divrei Torah and hear people giving divrei Torah. By the time I got to smicha, it was something that I was already pretty comfortable with. And then during the smicha process, you keep on picking it up. I'd say it took probably a year or two into my Rabbanos here in Boca for me to start, I'd say, developing my own voice in a non-trained sense, meaning so much of my training was formal, that to be able to speak in a conversational way took some time. I realized that, especially when it comes to differences in generations, the generation that taught me public speaking was very interested in formal speaking. But the generation that is listening to me speak now is far more interested in personal connection, and almost, if it's slightly unpolished, that's a draw. More conversational, a little more humorous is something that people are really interested in. Speaking didactically doesn't talk to this generation at all. Nobody likes to hear preaching. That's maybe once upon a time that's something that people really enjoyed and people got excited by. I don't think it's true anymore. I think people are not interested in hearing a rabbi stand up and saying you. People want to hear the rabbi stand up and saying I or we, when reflecting on things to talk about in a larger scheme. People are looking for a rabbi that is more vulnerable, even in as much as he is giving direction. But nobody wants to see a rabbi that is a finished product, because it makes people feel bad about themselves. Which, I mean, I joke with people that that's never my problem. Yeah, I'm certainly not one to pretend like I'm a finished product. But I think that there was a way of living and talking and thinking and existing once upon a time that people very much felt that if the rabbi is not like a finished product, then who is he to speak? And today people don't want that. They're not looking for, a rabbi that knows everything. They're looking for a rabbi that's working, that's engaging, that's trying, that's not looking for a rabbi that's failing either. But that's the balance.
Let me ask you, because you've worked as an NCSY director and you teach at a high school. Talk to me about the differences between presenting, not necessarily in a classroom, but presenting to young adults, teens, young adults, and to families, congregants, older adults. So
there's a difference, but there isn't that much of a difference. Many times a teen audience needs like a little bit more schmaltz to get them interested. Needs more of a story, more of a hook. Especially when it comes to things going on in the world, bring teens into the relevance of something often takes a little bit more time. But for things that people care about, ages are differences to a certain extent in presentation, but not so much in terms of messaging. I find people are. I mean, I'll differentiate between like elementary and middle school kids versus high school kids. Elementary and middle school kids, there's still like an edge of trying to kind of couch things so that, especially, like, I'll give an example of like what's going on in Eretz Yisrael right now. So there's a certain degree, like my kids are ages 2, 3, 11. So I don't really want them exposed to everything that's going on in the world. But my 16 and 18-year-old students, I'm not the one exposing them. They're exposed. They've seen it all. They've read it all. They're hearing it all. They're probably watching more of it than I am. So this is bothersome for them to the same degree that it's bothersome for their parents. And the ability to navigate how to think about those kinds of things is equally perplexing to adults and to teens. So the messaging of how to think about that needs to be clear. I've often reflected, and a lot of my writing at different points in time has reflected this, that the messaging that I share with adults often first goes through the classroom. And the reason for that is because adults are far more polite than teens are. Adults will smile and nod and say, all right, that didn't work for me, that was irrelevant. And teens will challenge me. I'll say something in a classroom and some kid is going to say, Rabbi, that doesn't make any sense. I think that that's garbage. Now, their parents might think it, but they'll say it. And I respect that. That for me is incredibly valuable. I get feedback from teens in a way that's far more honest than I'll ever get from adults. And that's, to a certain extent, just a symptom of the generation. People will talk about how kids aren't respect. I love it. I think that is so essential for honing the process of my own thoughts. Right? Chazal tell us, that you learn the most from your talmidim. So I learn the most from my talmidim. Also tongue-in-cheek, but not so much tongue-in-cheek. Whenever people in the community say, like, there's so much going on in the community, like, why are you still teaching in high school? So rabbis that are also teaching in schools have a far better handle on what's going on in their communities because kids are super honest. If you want to know what's going on in somebody's home, don't ask them, ask their kids. Like, how's it going? So kids will tell you. Kids are like super honest with this kind of stuff. I'll learn a lot more about what's going on in people's lives from their teenage children than arguably they would ever be comfortable sharing. Now, it's not because I'm trying to pry and figure things out. I want to know how I can help people. I want to know, like, in what ways can I be involved? And if somebody's sick, if somebody's going through a hard time or something or another. So often, parents want, I don't want to bother the rabbi, but the kids, like, it's obvious. Kids walk into class and he's exhausted, like, hey, what's going on? It's like, oh, no, my grandmother's really not feeling well. So that's helpful to me. I now know a piece of information that the parent didn't have the opportunity to share. So that's super helpful in general. But in terms of the messaging, the message is identical. The presentation might be a little bit different. And in a classroom setting, it's different simply because of the setting. But in terms of the Torah that's being taught, it's got to be the same because the problem is the same. So the solution, whatever that is, has to be the same.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on attention spans today?
I think that they are overrated and underrated. What I mean is, if things are interesting, people have no problem paying attention for extended periods of time. And if things are boring, people tune out instantaneously, which is good. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. That's our attention spans are continuously being hijacked by everything. So people are, to a certain extent, training themselves to only focus on the things that matter. A little bit more consciously would be helpful. But I think in general, if people are not listening to exciting things, then they will tune them out. And that's a mechayev for Rabbanim and for educators in general. But I think it's also a mechayev on people as a whole. People used to say that the most valuable thing that we have is time. And I think that that's changed now. And advertisers have figured this out. The most valuable thing that we have is attention, because only a certain percentage of your time has attention. So 7 hours can roll by with only 3 seconds of somebody paying attention. Those 3 seconds of paying attention are valuable. That's where your click goes. That's where your eyes go. That's where the money goes. And people online, are trying to optimize that as much as possible to capture not your time so much, but your attention. And that's the thing that we are giving away, unfortunately, so much more willingly for free services on, YouTube and TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. We're giving away our attention, and they're trying desperately to capture that attention. But because of that, people are not as just by definition, the threshold of something being interesting is much higher, which I think has value. I think there's value to having a higher threshold for what I'm willing to give my attention to, which means that Rabbanan have to work harder. Yes. It's not the case that, somebody can stand up and just be like, hey, I'm a rabbi, I have something to say. And people will be like, oh, he's a rabbi, he has something to say. Nobody cares. But if it's interesting, if it's engaging, so if it crosses that threshold of what's important for me to give attention to, so then it crosses into that 1% of 1% of something that I'm gonna give my attention to, and that becomes gold.
So what are the things that you do to combat or maybe compete with the distractions?
I think it comes down to saying things that are important and relevant. Meaning, if the question that I'm addressing is a question that you have, then you're interested in what I have to say. You might agree with me, you might disagree with me. But if what I'm talking about is relevant, that's useful. If what I'm talking about is not relevant, then that's not useful. And if what I'm talking about is going to make you feel bad about yourself without it helping in any way, shape, manner, or form, so that's not useful. People want to walk out of a drasha with something interesting, with something valuable, with something that makes them feel good or inspired or engaged or enticed or something, a mashihu. If it makes you feel bad, you're just going to stop listening. You're going to tune out. And if it's not important, then you're not going to care. So it needs to cross those thresholds of something that is interesting, something that is relevant, something that addresses, answers, speaks to a piece of something that is stirring within me, or within my children, or within my spouse, or parents, or something, but relating to something core that I've been pushing off thinking about this, and here comes somebody giving me a way of thinking about it in a way that I didn't have access to, and I'm going to walk away with something meaningful, with a solution to that problem that I have, with an answer or a mahalach, a derech, a something to that question. So yeah, that becomes something worthwhile. There's another piece to it, which I've reflected upon this with a number of my friends and colleagues. In many ways, I view myself as a connector and a translator. And what I mean is that there's a whole world of Sfarim, of Torah, that has been cooking up solutions to life's biggest problems for the last 4,500 years. And I have the incredible schus of having access to that through my learning and through my training and through my education and through my rebbeim. I've been given lots of things. And I have a tzibur of people that don't have the same access, but have the same right to that knowledge. It's their Torah as much as it's mine. My job is to take that and give it to them. To see that they have a question, there's an answer on a bookshelf that they don't have the access to. But if I can just connect those dots in a way that that question relates to that answer, so now I've said something meaningful to them, because ultimately people want to know that the way that they're living their life is in accordance with their moral system, even if they don't know what their moral system says. And if I can say the Torah, which is yours, says that the answer to your problem is this. So, well, now I've just married the question and the answer. That's valuable.
Amazing. Tell me about your the way you structure a drasha. Talk to me about the opening, how you conclude, how you tie things together. Is there any specific way that you do it, or do you keep it fluid? Changes week to week, or is there something you like to do specifically?
I don't have a formula that I plug into. It depends on kind of where the drasha starts. Sometimes the drasha will start with a question, something that happened that I don't want to shy away from this essential central thing that's going on. So I'll start with that. 100 days of war in Gaza, 100 days since Simchas Torah. I'll start with that sentence. Tomorrow will be 100 days of our brothers and sisters being held hostage in Hamas terror dungeons. Let's talk about that. So that'll be a beginning. Or I'll start with the story. Very rarely I'll start with a pasuk. Almost more rarely I'll start with Rashi says, because those for a lot of people are like automatic tune-offs. But when I do it, the tzibur knows that this is definitely something interesting, because he never does that. So it's very rarely used, but it's used judiciously. Most of the time it's talking about what's the thing that I want to talk about. I've moved away from the beginning of the drasha being the most enticing part to trying to move that to the end, simply because people remember the end more than they remember the beginning. That's just the way human nature works. So I'll often start with the end in mind. Like, what's the thing that the rabbi spoke about? Like, that's the piece. And then I'll put it together from there. And there are times that there's pieces of the drasha that I'll move around, and then there's times that I'll take out a piece and put in something else that I think is better. And those pieces and chunks of a drasha kind of flow together. Again, there's one central message of it, but the ending has to be something significant, and the beginning has to be something relevant. So now that's beginning, middle, and end, figuring out what to do with it.
Yeah. What do? You probably visit, maybe a scholar in residence, or you lecture other places. What are some of the things you do to connect with an audience that you've never been in front of before? I mean, you have the luxury of speaking to your people week in, week out, but what happens when you find yourself in front of a new audience? How do you make the connection?
So it's a great question. I don't do a tremendous amount of speaking outside, but whenever I do, I'll try to figure out what's relevant to them. What's the thing that they want to know about? Like, if somebody says, I want you to come and speak, I'll say, well, what do you want me to speak about? And why me? Why is it me, and why is it that thing? Unless you want me to come and teach Torah, I'm happy to give a shir. That's different. That's different from a drasha, from a talk, from chizuk, whatever it might be. If somebody says, I want you to come and speak about X, I'm like, why? Why is that a thing that's important? What's going on that makes this thing relevant? And that'll be the connection point. Oftentimes, and I'll do this within my community as well, like I'll talk about people that are there with their permission. So that, I was having a conversation with this guy, and they asked this particular question, and I'm really grateful. Thank you so much. That's also great for audience participation. When people feel that the thing that they were addressing with the rabbi is the thing that, guys like coming up to me afterwards at Kiddush and be like, so you like that question, right? I'm like, yeah, it was a great question. Really happy you asked me that question, because now it's an opportunity to speak about that with the tzibur. So I'll do that wherever I am. I'm speaking to somebody. When I spoke to your rabbi, he mentioned that this is the thing that's going on in the community. We had something similar. I had something similar happen in my life. Just those connection points, those pieces of resonance of there's a thing that's going on here and a thing that's going on there, and then we can put it together, and this now becomes meaningful for all of us.
Yeah. What do you find hardest to either prepare or to deliver at an entire year? The whole gamut. You have Shabbos, weekly Shabbos drashas, you have the Shabbos Shuva marathon, all the way through Ne'ilah. You have Shabbos Gadol, you have Yizkor speeches, eulogies. Where do you find the most challenging?
The single hardest drasha of the year is Kol Nidre. Hands down. For one very simple reason, is you have two conflicting forces acting simultaneously. On the one hand, people want to be inspired. On the other hand, they are absolutely not prepared to be inspired at all. It is the same as trying to give a drasha after Shabbos lunch. Everybody has just had Shabbos lunch. They're feeling bloated. They're feeling gross. They're showing up. They're nervous. They're supposed to be feeling spiritual. They're not interested in feeling spiritual, but they feel guilty about not yet feeling spiritual. And now, Rabbi, inspire me while I'm like, oh. It's the hardest Drasha of the year. It is the single hardest Drasha of the year. And sometimes I'll start off Yom Kippur with that. Be like, we're not ready for this. Nobody is interested, even though we all want to be. It's a hard Drasha. It's a really hard Drasha, framing the most significant day of Avodas Hashem of the year for the vast majority of the community, while you've just eaten cholent and kugel. Like, that's how it feels. It's like everybody is not ready for that, but really wants to be and isn't. The rest of the year, there's challenging drashas, obviously, but as a every year in, year out, that is the hardest. It happens to be that I like learning, so preparing drashas is not something that I do so much consciously as much as I'm learning, and I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to understand myself. I'm trying to understand the Rebbe Shul. I'm trying to understand his Torah. I'm trying to understand the world. And I'm trying to understand my tzibur and how I can help them, what I can do with them. And there have been years that people said to me, Rebbe, you spoke the whole year about this one theme or this one person, and I was like, yeah, because that's what I'm learning this year. That's and I'm very, very, very honest about that. Like, there's times that I'll say in Shul, I'll say, those of you that were here 6 years ago will remember that when we learned the Sforno for the year, this was the point that we made. And then people will come up to me and say, like, Rebbe, that's not fair. I wasn't here 6 years ago. I'm like, okay, so you came late. We'll catch you up. I've often related to my tzibur that Baruch Hashem, we're coming up. Next year will be our 10th year in the Shul. That really I've only given one drasha, and it's taken 10 years, and we're still doing it. And it's reflecting on those themes and coming back to those ideas as we grow as people and as Avdei Hashem, reflecting on those pieces that we've learned and that we've acquired and that we've understood and that we've grown from.
So we're almost out of time. I wanted to ask you if you had two pieces of advice to give to a young rabbi entering his congregation for the first time, getting ready to stand behind the pulpit, embark on a speaking career. What two pieces of advice would you impart?
Piece number one is learn. The more that you learn, the more that you can share. You never want to be searching for a drasha. It's a terrible place to be when a rabbi says, I'm supposed to have something meaningful and I don't have anything meaningful. I have to go look. But if you're learning, that's helpful. And learn, you have to learn the things that you love. And you have to share those things. So learn. Don't prepare drashas. Learn Torah and the drashas come. That's, aside from the fact that you have to read a lot of stories and do the things that add the schmaltz to it, but learn. That's the ikar. Then you have things to say. That's Aleph. And Beis is ask people for feedback and take them seriously. That's important. And even if people give feedback without you asking, that's even more important. Take that feedback very seriously. That's also an ikar. Those would be the two things: keep learning and keep getting better. I've looked back at some of my drushes that I wrote up, 5, 6, 7 years ago, and I cringe. And I'm really happy that I cringe because it means that I've grown. And I'm very much I'm hopeful that in a few years' time I'm going to look back on the drushes that I gave now, and I'm going to cringe again. Not at all of them. I don't cringe at everything that I wrote and that I said, but that I should be able to say I could do better now. I want to be able to say that. I want to be able to say that I'm still growing when it comes to giving drushes. If I ever get to a point in time where I used to give great drushes, it'll be very tragic for me. I want to be able to say there's more that I'm growing and learning and understanding, and that there's more to share.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, fantastic. I learned so much. Like I said, is there anywhere that you want me to point people towards?
So take a look, railblumenthal.org, and the stuff that's going on at our shul, brswest.net. We're growing. We've grown from 20 families to about 170, 180 families in the last 8-9 years. So Baruch Hashem, Ken Yirbo.
All right, continued Hatzlacha to you. Sounds like you're doing great things.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity.
You've been listening to The Maggid Method, and I'm Daniel Steinberg. There's a secret that great public speakers know. Did you know there's a method for cutting straight through to an audience's heart, grabbing their attention and holding it, and making a memorable impact with your presentation? The best speakers in the world utilize it, and now you can too, every time you get up to speak. Download your free Maggid Method of Public Speaking template at maggidmethod.com, maggidmethod.com. The Maggid Method will teach you how to find your authentic voice, craft meaningful presentations, manage people's attention, and build unbreakable bonds with your audience. Go to maggidmethod.com and download your free copy now.